Ladies and gentlemen of Hashtag Nation, you are being very, very spoiled tonight in a twofer. As we released our video of the drive-through this morning, I have a very special guest from NY Up and Syracuse.com. Buffalo Bills beat writer Matt Parrino is going to be joining Hashtag Nation tonight. So get all your comments and questions in as fast as possible, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. But first, let's introduce our guest on the Bluetooth Breakdown. Matt, how you doing tonight?
I am wonderful at 10:30 at night. I respect you guys on the grind because you told me you have some kids. I'm usually sleeping by now, so no, it's awesome though. I like a little late night sports chat.
Oh, believe me, I would rather be sleeping right now. I would rather be sleeping, as is
Yeah.
Paul, because we got the little ones running around the house right now. So I mean, a lot of things going on in the world of the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are 4-1. We're going into a bye. Your quick take on the first 5 games that the Buffalo Bills have played this year.
Pleasantly surprised. I had high expectations for them going into the season just because I thought it was a complete overhaul of an offense that left pretty much everything to be desired last year. I thought that what they did on the offensive line was a good start, and I think that you have to early on be impressed with the ability of John Feliciano has been kind of like a really under the radar guy that's really popped in 5 games. I don't think Mitch Morse or Cody Ford has really gotten comfortable yet, and I think they're in different situations. I mean, I think Mitch, it's almost like he's played his first 5 games because he missed the whole preseason. So I think it's been a process getting accustomed to leading a whole unit. Whereas Ford, a rookie who struggled really mightily in pass protection, is still kind of coming along slowly in that part of his game, which is a shame because as a run blocker, he's been really dominant. I mean, if you go back and watch the tape in most of these games, I mean, he is mauling guys in the run game. It's just he's not quick enough yet or understanding his responsibilities enough yet to maintain in pass protection. So that's been kind of fun to watch. But this offensive line as a whole, I mean, in the ninth ranked run offense in the league with basically a 36-year-old leading the way, I think has been really impressive. And I think it speaks to, what I called going into the season, their 2 biggest acquisitions were Bobby Johnson on the offensive line and Ken Dorsey, quarterbacks coach, because I thought that those 2 position coaches last year were so bad and didn't really offer those groups enough to develop that it's almost like a 360 this year, a 180 this year. You got Brian Dable, who's able to kind of mix his time up a little bit more with each position group, and now you have Ken Dorsey, who's kind of attached at the hip with Josh Allen, and you have Bobby Johnson, who's not only developed and kind of curated a really cohesive offensive line, but he's been the kind of mastermind, I think, behind the scenes of this run game, which, I mean, you're looking ahead, man, I mean, you get Devin Singletary back healthy, and this could be really special. So I think the first 5 weeks of the season, 4-1, yeah, I think you should be 5-0 if Josh Allen maybe doesn't get hurt in that fourth quarter, but you have to be happy with where they're at.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I want to point out right away was how, and I maybe it just caught me by surprise, but over the first 2 games, I was shocked by how versatile and aggressive Feliciano was. When you start seeing the guards and centers pull the way that they were able to on the interior, that was not what I really expected. Feliciano gets downfield fast. And he was what an awesome acquisition. We call a Bobby Johnson OG Bobby Johnson here. I don't know if you'll get the reference. Mario's old, so he could probably explain the reference.
Oh,
But we call
Paul.
him OG Bobby Johnson around here.
Oh,
We do.
we do. We call him OG Bobby Johnson, but that's not the number one nickname I want to have stick. I want to have Tremaine Edmonds start being called the Predator because that guy is just an animal out there, just going all over the place, making tackles everywhere. So yeah, Feliciano for me, if we were to pick like an offensive, sleeper, I think he's done a wonderful job, and I think maybe the adjustment with Morse probably coming over is a little tough because he missed a lot of time at camp. I mean, and Feliciano was able to dive right in there. The familiarity with Johnson, he was able to thrive in the offense, and I think. I mean, I'm not mistaken, but I think Feliciano for those first couple games was making the line calls for Morse as while he was getting his feet wet. So that's definitely be something to watch. But right out of the gate, we got comments coming in for Hashtag Nation, guys. Thank you for once again. We have Matt Parrino on from NYUp and Syracuse.com. Right under his picture is his Twitter handle, so be sure to give him a follow as well. The big news for the Buffalo Bills, though, on Monday, trading wide receiver Zay Jones to the Raiders for a 5th-round pick. What is your take on? I mean, because Duke Johnson was so, he expressed a lot of feeling towards Zay, who was helping him out during the game, and a lot of those things in the post game. What do you feel that does to the team and or the wide receiver group as a whole moving forward?
It's interesting. Like, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but over the last couple of weeks, I've really noticed Zay Jones's, even going back to minicamp to less of a degree, his insistence on being the first guy in the wide receiver line in practice. And I go back to last season, and I always thought that Kelvin Benjamin had that same weird, like, almost like first day of school, I got to be at the front of the line type of idea. I think that he had a vision for what he was in this league that after 2.5 years, just didn't match with what this organization believed that he brought to the table. And I think that they gave him probably more opportunity than I thought coming out of the gates because of what they added in John Brown. I thought Robert Foster at 23% snap count in the 3 games that he's played was really low. I mean, if you go back to before the season, I mean, most conversations I had really centered around the potential of Robert Foster in this offense, especially with John Brown's addition, Cole Beasley kind of manning the slot. So I'm not surprised that they moved on. I think that there was an attitude issue. I think that you saw that play out in the Patriots game. I think that he's somebody that, getting a chance to know him at a very baseline level over the last 1.5 years, my takeaway has been, while I like Zay Jones a lot, I don't think that he loves football. And I think that if you don't love football, you're not going to fit in to this culture in Buffalo, because Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have been very forthcoming about the kind of guys that they're looking for. And that's who they want, guys that live and breathe and die for ball, as they say it. And, that's why they brought in Frank Gore. I mean, you could talk about what he brings to the offense from a, skill set perspective, but he just he wakes up and all he's thinking about is football. And that's the kind of guys they want on this team. And so I think that with Zay Jones, that just never really meshed. And he's also not a Brandon Beane draft pick for all intents and purposes. I mean, he wasn't here yet. I wonder if that would have been the pick if he was. So, I think it's a good to move on. I think you have some options here with Duke Williams and with Robert Foster, who I still think has a ton of potential and runway for what he could be in this league. But if not, if you want to, maybe sell some of those drafts, some of that draft capital and try to cash in and get a wide receiver, there's some options out there.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the Beane McDermott era. It didn't really start until when they drafted Josh Allen. They traded up to get all those picks. But you look at it. I mean, Zay Jones was the second pick that McDermott ever made. Behind Trey White. So it's very interesting for them to see them part ways with that.
Maury, and I want to call something out, right? So if you take a look up and down the wide receiver depth chart now, there's not a single rostered player that the Bills have drafted at the wide receiver position, right? Because they moved on from Ray McCloud. Zay Jones was the only other one. So there's no rostered drafted players here. So, you kind of always kind of look at the Bills and saying, okay, there's some positions that they're willing to turn and burn where they don't always want to put the investment. And, wide receiver appears to be where that is right now. Like, I'm not going to say that. I'm talking long-term investment, right? John Brown and Cole Beasley, while they were investments in the offseason, we're not talking massive dollars. We're not talking, tons of years. But it's very fascinating to me how often they tried to give Zay Jones a chance and how often that chance just went squandered. Right. And we've mentioned it a bunch of times, Mario, and I know, Matt, you might not have heard us say this, but we say all the time, 6-10 sometimes isn't good enough for 10-6. And one of the big things that everybody kind of lynched to with Zay Jones was, well, he was your team's leading receiver last year. Sure. Yeah, you can go with that. If you're comfortable living in that world, you can go with that. But good enough for 6-10 isn't always good enough for 10-6. I think Zay kind of fell into that category.
Yeah, Speaking of offensive guys that may be wearing out their welcome, I know Paul and I are going to have a very distinct difference of opinion on this one, Matt. Dion Dawkins is another guy whose name has come up quite a bit. You know, he's a captain on this team. He's a guy that seems well respected within the locker room. However, Paul and I have been banging the drum for many years, saying that how good he would like. I think he could be an All-Pro guard. However, the narrative for the Buffalo Bills and their franchise is that he's going to be their solid left tackle. I'm just curious about your take on Dion Dawkins and his role as a captain and as a left tackle for long term for this team.
You know, it's interesting. I think that the Bills are tied to two guys in Dion Dawkins and Cody Ford, who they obviously have strong feelings about where they think they could play in this league, but where they probably project better is on the inside. And then you're left with, nothing right now in terms of tackle. Now, here's a thought that I've been kind of, banging around the last couple of days is that, if you do think that you're close and you do think that you have, some pieces on offense that are working and you want to really upgrade, you go out there and maybe take a run at a Trent Williams who will immediately become, an all-pro caliber left tackle. You can move Dion Dawkins to the right side because I think he's at least better in pass protection at this stage than Cody Ford. And I think you move Cody Ford inside and then figure things out with Feliciano, Spain, and Morris, however that ends up, playing out. I think Feliciano's earned a starting job in some capacity. Quentin Spain's been kind of up and down for me. I know Pro Football Focus seems to grade him really, really well, but I think that there's been some inconsistencies in his game, especially in pass protection. There's been some times on both sides. I mean, Cody Ford, you could find 3 or 4 times he gets blown up per game, but Quentin Spain's been broken down. Mitch Morse as well, and Mitch Morse, as we move along here, I have been kind of easy on him because it's, like I said, it's his first 4 or 5 games getting into game shape. That's $44 million. That's a lot of money for a center. And what they were telling everybody is they brought him in here to be the guy that protects Josh Allen up the middle because of his pass protection acumen. And so far, I've been left wanting more. And so I think from an offensive line perspective, it's been good. But there's moving pieces to this that can make it even better. And I think that that's okay because I think that the goal was always 2020 for when they believed that they were going to be kind of how competitive they think they could be was going to start in 2020. I don't think this year was ever earmarked for, run at a division or a deep playoff run. So they have time still, but there's important decisions looming, like you mentioned.
Yeah. So if you're, I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead. I know you're.
Oh, no, I was gonna make a comment to Matt. I mean, you're talking about moving Dawkins. We're gonna get along just fine. It's been a long-standing discussion. I know you brought up Trent Williams, and one of the things that I find most about Brandon Beane, and you let me know whether you agree with this or not. If Brandon Beane had another war chest of 2nd and 3rd round picks, I think he'd be willing to part with a 1st round pick and make a move like a Trent Williams. But I really think Brandon Beane just values those upper echelon picks so much. Moving for a known commodity is not where he is right now, right? So I think if he had a couple seconds, a couple thirds where he'd felt like he had a little bit more viability to move into the 1st, if there was something that they wanted, that might be a reasonable option for them. But in 2020, they've only got their own 1st, their own 2nd, their own 3rd, their own 4th. They don't start getting into other picks until they get into the 5th. I just don't think he's got the war chest of picks to move a 1st rounder. I just feel like he values that pick too much.
Yeah, and he said that. Like, you're right on the money with that. Like, he values his draft picks, and he doesn't believe in the philosophy that you're ever one player away necessarily. And I agree. I don't think that they're necessarily, a wide receiver or a left tackle away from, making a deep run in the playoffs or somehow managing to outclass the Patriots in the AFC East this season. But with that said, I do think that he's kind of always sneaky looking at deals. I mean, I think that Antonio Brown thing was a little bit further along than he would lead you to believe. I don't have any insider information on that, but I just think that if you're going to start down that path, you are willing to shake things up and bring in a bona fide star in some of these positions. And listen, Stephon Diggs, I put out that, I'd give up a first round pick for Stephon Diggs. And there was a lot of people agreed. Some people blew back and were like, is he really a number one receiver? And it's like, yeah, like I think that last year's production and the ability in that offense with a talented guy like Adam Thielen putting up those kind of numbers and that kind of touchdown mark makes you kind of a number one receiver in this league. Now, he would be a low-end number one receiver, but right now, they don't even have that. I think John Brown, people forget his best year came in Arizona alongside Larry Fitzgerald. And so that's what would allow this offense, I think, to really take that next step. We're 16 games into his career, and Josh Allen still doesn't have a 300-yard passing game. So I just think that you have to always be evaluating it, but I think you're on the money. I wouldn't be expecting Brandon Beane to make some type of blockbuster trade thinking that, it's now or never, this is the time.
Wow, Paul and Matt, so many things to unpack right there. I just need I need a second. No, as we talked about Zay Jones a little bit earlier in the broadcast, talking about how he wasn't a Brandon Beane pick. Well, neither was Dawkins. So that could be a big thing. The other thing that we're not mentioning here is the Adrian Waddle didn't even get a chance because he ended up going on IR. So with the things that have been going on with Dion Dawkins, you want to talk about the chances and everything that Zay Jones has had. Dion Dawkins really hasn't anyone, with the exception of Cordy Glenn, who they traded, he really hasn't had anybody pushing him in that respect. That there's a couple of guys that they signed. Well, the guy that they signed who possibly could have taken his position, I don't know if that would have happened or not, in Adrian Waddle ended up getting hurt, so it was his to lose essentially. And then, when we come into, you start talking about the offensive system that they have here, would I love Diggs here? Yeah, if the numbers work and everything else. Beane always seems to have that big picture outlook that, he always, every time, Bills fans will talk about, hey, we didn't see that coming. How did he do this? How does he do this? Does he have like pictures of like guys around the league, the GMs, like how he's able to make these deals that we talk about? So as far as, Diggs coming in here, and you want to talk about John Brown's most successful season in Arizona, that was with Arians. That offensive style that Arians loves to run there is vastly different than the New England, NutraSweet version that Brian Daboll has brought over to the Buffalo Bills, where in Brian Daboll's system, you don't need necessarily, the Earnhardt Perkins system, you don't need necessarily a number one bona fide wideout for it to work. You need a bunch of different pieces for it to work. Now, New England has mastered this system, and the unfortunate part about it is we don't know how the system really would have worked if it would have worked in the same capacity if the best tight end in the NFL didn't play there. You had one of the best slot receivers. They had Welker and Edelman there. So in that respect, I think they would rather, and Paul is going to hammer me for this one, they would rather have 4 2s than a number one and a couple 3s. Paul, you can shake your head all you want. That's just my philosophy. You're not going to have 4 number 2 defensive backs, dude. You're not going to do it. You get mad at me all you want. Matt could probably settle the tie here for us, but that's not how it's going to be.
I would appreciate that, Matt. Okay, philosophically, you need to settle this for us, all right? So philosophically, Mario has been I'd rather have 4 2s than a 1 and 3 3s. I disagree with that. I think you could scheme a 1 and 3 3s. I think normally when you have 4 2s, and I'm going to try and make an argument here for it. I think normally when you have 4 2s, it's typically because those receivers are dimensional in a specific way that it kind of telegraphs what exactly those players are going to be best at in a scheme, and defenses can work around that. So I personally think 4 2s is a waste of everybody's time because that's what we've done in Buffalo for the last 20 years. So I think it's a waste of everybody's time. I would just like your opinion on this.
I think there's 2 schools of thought. No,
there is.
No, I think it's I think that New England does what they do with the allotment of talent that they have. You look over the course of the last 20 years, they've done their best to go out and get a number one receiver at various junctures of this dynasty. I mean, they went out and they got Randy Moss. When they went out and got Josh Gordon, I mean, for all intents and purposes, despite his struggles this year, I think he's been pretty invisible through the first few weeks of the season. Mm-hmm. He's a bona fide number one when he's healthy. So I think that their philosophy is if we can have a number one, if we could go out and get an Antonio Brown, who is a little bit more of a slash, I guess, in a way, because he's not a prototypical number one, but he puts up number one numbers.
Yeah.
That I think that they want good players, and I think that's what Brandon Beane wants. I think he wants good players. I think that if Stephon Diggs added into this offense, there's nobody on this roster right now that does what Stephon Diggs does. So I think from that perspective, you take out the number one, number two, number three, you add a piece in like that. And I think that if you look at Minnesota's success over the last couple of years, I think that Adam Thielen is able to do a lot of what he does because he's on the field with Stephon Diggs. So that was more my philosophy, in that I think it opens so many more doors for so many other players when you bring a guy of that kind of talent level in.
I totally agree with the effect that Diggs has on Thielen in that offense. And Minnesota's gonna have to make some decisions very quick because of the $86 million man, however much he's making at this point. But Matt, when I invited you on tonight, I didn't think you probably didn't think you were going to be a marriage counselor at one point during this time. But me and Paul have been banging the drums on that. But like I said, if Stephon Diggs were to come to Buffalo now there's some decisions to be made, because we even watched. I mean, we're relatively limited to the things that we're allowed to see and the things that we're allowed to basically report what goes on. We watched the Embedded series, and Beane made a very, very poignant point in there when he was like, listen, what you pay guys and what guys you bring in, other guys see that. Other guys are going to be, it's going to affect the culture and or the locker room what's going on, behind the scenes. So we have to be very careful about who we sign, how much we sign them for, and whatnot. I mean, when they were going after Nasecki, they were paying him starter money. That's what they were doing. So when he comes in with that type of mindset, it's really going to affect the team. So I don't know what kind of, I think, is Diggs upset in Minnesota because of the volume of targets he's going to get? Does he think that that's going to change when he comes to Buffalo? I don't know. I don't know what kind of discussions have been going on with Stephon Diggs, but as far as a fan, I love him here. But I just don't know how the numbers would work for the Buffalo Bills. I mean, they got enough cap room. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the effect on the team itself.
Yeah, but Mark, just to kind of piggyback off that, right? So I think there's a lot of lessons that we still have to remember that Brandon Beane is learning along the way, right? So first off, thank you to Scott Blakely for the donation, the super chat. We appreciate you guys, so thank you. Yeah. But let's look at some of the trials and tribulations, right? Because you had KB, who was disgruntled in Carolina, and then he comes to Buffalo, right? We see how that ended. You had AB, who was disgruntled in Pittsburgh, and there was an effort to bring him here, and we see how that all went a couple stops later, right? So if you have a player like Stephon Diggs, who's also disgruntled, is this really something that Brandon Beane is truly interested in, looking at what he's done with his previous acquisitions, right? Like, is that something he's really going to even be interested in?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question. I think that trying to get into the mind of Brandon Beane is a really difficult thing to do, because you mentioned Ty Nsekhe. He's a great case study. For when he was signed, I thought he was signed to come in here and push Dion Dawkins, and he hasn't gotten a sniff at left tackle, which is where he actually put his best film from the last 2 years. That's where he was the best, is that left tackle. He didn't even play right tackle. So I thought, even before the season started, that when he was brought in here to push Dion Dawkins, and it's almost like they've been married to the idea that Dion Dawkins is going to stay at left tackle. So I don't really know where Brandon Beane is trending in terms of those kind of maneuvers, but and who knows, a lot of what he says could be lip service. You never know. Like he says he doesn't believe in that one player away, but then that would totally go against the idea of inquiring about Antonio Brown because of the absolute drama shit show that he was. Ooh, sorry if I can't swear. And okay, I guess I can. Okay. In Pittsburgh, I mean, for any team that was approaching that, I don't believe in this culture idea that fans talk about with the process, in the sense that if you ever been a bad guy, you're not going to fit in here. Let's be honest. LaShawn McCoy isn't the greatest guy, but he fit here because he loves football. So I think that Antonio Brown, what they liked about him is that he works his ass off. He lives to play the game for the most part. And they thought that would kind of rub off on other people here. Well, I don't know if you could say the same thing about a Stephon Diggs or a Trent Williams or some of these other players that are potentially on the horizon. But if they do check those boxes, man, I do think in those scenarios, if it makes sense from a cost perspective, it's something to consider.
The thing that gets me about Dawkins, though, Matt, and you might have your finger a little bit closer to the pulse than I. Like you mentioned, like Dawkins was somebody whom there was red flags around when the Bills drafted him. Right, it's because he had an off-season altercation that he was involved with Hassan Reddick, and everybody here in Buffalo was saying, "Well, the Bills are going to go after Hassan Reddick. That's really a big target for them." And they went to school together, obviously, Hassan Reddick and Dawkins. And through the vetting process of Hassan Reddick, they vetted Dion Dawkins through what they felt wasn't a big deal. Now, I think Dawkins is untouchable. Right, he is your left tackle. He's not moving anywhere, and I think a lot of that is because of the captaincy. Right. I really don't think they want to upset the apple cart and, and topple everything over because they named him a captain. And as soon as you start playing around with a captain on the team, doesn't that cause some ripples inside that locker room?
Yes and no. I think that LaShawn McCoy was a captain last year, and you could tell from the very jump when mini camp and players reported that Frank Gore had completely taken over that role in the locker room. And this is a guy that, he's still been productive, but he's well past his Pro Bowl potential, where LaShawn McCoy in 2018 was coming off a 2017 season where he went to the Pro Bowl. So this was a guy that's, I think, still believes he could be the guy and 1,000-yard rusher in this league. And you basically were telling him, hey, we're stripping the captaincy away from him from the very get-go. Because all they talked about was how they raved about Frank Gore's leadership. So I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I don't think that anybody's safe per se. But I do think that Dion Dawkins is a guy that they want to work. And I think that they tasked Bobby Johnson with the objective of getting him to work. And so I think there's been improvements from a play perspective. I thought he's been considerably better and more consistent than he was last year. Now, with that being said, is that good enough? I don't think so. I think there's still room to grow. And obviously I could tell that you two gentlemen aren't big believers in that progression happening. But I think that, I think they think Bobby Johnson is a bit of a miracle worker. And I think what he's done on this run game, and I think he's already done some good things for Dawkins as a run blocker. So we'll see if he can progress a little bit, because he's still, he gave up the first big fumble of Josh's season this year. It was his fault.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer. I love OG Bobby Johnson, but he's no Scarnecchia. From New England.
Yes.
He's not that animal. I don't know if he could turn water into wine with Dawkins, but we've been very. A quick side note: we had Dion Dawkins actually follow us on Twitter for a day, and it was the worst week he could have followed us, because we tore him up in the comments and in our videos that week. It wasn't even on purpose. It was just we just think he's a better guard. It's going to be kind of hard to get me off of that perch. So, as far as Dion Dawkins goes, but, transitioning really quick, and fans of Hashtag Nation, we're joined by Matt Parrino of nyup.com and Syracuse.com. So make sure to give him a follow. His Twitter handle is just below the phone there. So be sure to give him a follow there. He's got awesome content, Buffalo Bills beat writer. So, transferring over, Paul has a very big concern. If we could go over to the other side of the ball real quick. Paul has a huge concern. And stop looking freaked out. Yeah, he's got a few concerns.
Okay.
One is who he decides to host a show with. That's his first concern. But his second concern is he's worried about the depth at linebacker. When the Buffalo Bills traded Zay Jones away, I know Paul started licking his lips about, could we get more depth in here at linebacker? Because if Milano or Edmonds goes down, it's going to be 10 times worse than Ford going down and Bates coming in to kind of put a Band-Aid over the Titans game. So what is your take on the depth that they have at linebacker, or if a Milano or an Edmonds goes down, do they have the right guys in place to take over for them?
No, from the sense that I think that even a guy they really like in Corey Thompson, I thought there was a considerable drop off when Matt Milano went out last year. As good as Corey Thompson is, and the development potential that he has shown. I think he's looked great when healthy this year, but he's not as good as Matt Milano. And now, I mean, Matt Milano has been kind of groomed for 2 years now, so I wouldn't expect that to be the case. But yeah, I think there's a big drop off with Tremaine Edmonds if he goes out, especially at the level of play that he's offering right now. But also, like looking around the league, I mean, how many teams you probably could count on one hand have a really excellent, pool of backup linebackers to come in if their starters go down. Yeah. So from that perspective, I mean, yeah, you're probably not going to get much better situation. I did see that I'm on vacation this week, but my tag team partner over at NY Up put out a story today that Dion Buchanan, who's just released, the Bills might have some interest in him. I think that would be a one heck of a depth addition if you can get a guy with some experience in this league that is a former first round pick. But overall, I don't think I agree in the sense that you don't ever want to be in the situation where Lorenzo Alexander has to be playing, upwards of 50, 60, 70% of the snaps, because that's when you're losing the advantage that you have with how you're deploying him now. So he's really effective as a pass rusher in spurts. He's really effective in coverage in spurts. But if you're asking him to do both of those things too much at his age, I think that's when you'll start to see a little bit of a decline. And as good as Kyle Williams was last year, listen, he outshined any type of expectations I had for him. Mm-hmm. The more he was on the field, the less effective that he was. So I think, it's definitely troubling. I think a concern that I'm having more so, though, on this defensive side of the ball, which there aren't many, is the kind of, and I shouldn't say it's a concern, but with each week that goes by, and I almost feel like we're seeing a dip in the production and the effectiveness of Ed Oliver. And so that is a little bit concerning to me, because I thought that it was going to be like an upwards trend for him. Each repetition, each snap, each moment of experience was going to come with more effective kind of techniques and ability to get in the backfield. And I thought early on he was getting in there pretty regularly, even if he wasn't getting sacks. I went back and watched the Titans game, and it looked like he was really struggling with some of the size and some of the double teams. And that has me a little bit concerned. But hey, you got Jordan Phillips there to come in here and get you 3 sacks, so it might all be good.
Havoc. Yeah.
Well, I think a little bit of that, Matt, is because Oliver was dropping weight right before the scouting combine to show that he could play defensive end, and then he comes into camp, and you really don't have a ton of time to like weight control prior to the season. So on the interior, I think next season we'll see him quite a bit heavier. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's going to hurt his frame at all to add another 15 pounds. I think it'll probably help with that. But I don't think he's at the right weight for what they intend to use him for right now.
No, that's a good observation. And also, I think that he was a little bit naive about the level of competition he was jumping up into, and he actually told me that like 2 weeks ago, and I respect him for that.
That's awesome.
Because a lot of guys with the kind of ego that some of these guys have, and Oliver obviously is a guy that believes in his talent, would come into this thing and probably wouldn't want to admit that. And he was pretty forthcoming about it. Like, it's a game of inches. I have to make sure that everything fundamentally is working on every snap, and at least he has that realization. So from that perspective, it's not a concern. But for a guy that, for the most part, was going to be maybe the most disruptive guy in this draft, I just wanted to see a little bit more of it. But it's a great scenario, because you could come in, play on a piece on one of the best defenses in the league, and there's no real rushes for you to be that impactful, like crazy sack machine just yet.
I love how you mentioned Lorenzo, because I have him as my MVP for the first. I know that's, we talk about the defense. That's only, if you take out the Patriots and the Jets games, they're only allowing 11 points per game. Those scores, the punt, the block punt, and everything like that. But Lorenzo, because of the versatility that he has, I love all the stuff that he's able to do on that defense, and I feel so much more comfortable with him with his hand in the dirt than trying to cover a slant route. And I think the Buffalo Bills feel the same way. And I mean, that's awesome about that. Oliver, telling you that. That's Paul and I always joke around about that. Like, I don't even know what I'd say if we had any of these, any of these guys in the car with us during any of our shows. Like, I'd probably be terrified.